Well, the series that you all are traveling in, this I Am series, is absolutely the best way that you could spend your time on a Sunday morning. It's looking to Jesus to understand who he is and what he's like, and most importantly for us, how we can know this Jesus. I love that the scriptures don't leave a lot of mystery around who Jesus is. As a matter of fact, we get to hear from Jesus himself in his own words describing who he is to all of us. So far, we've heard that he is the bread of life, that he is the light of the world, and today we're going to focus on his proclamation that he is the gate. Now, I have to be honest with you, in my own life, in my own story, I need this reminder this morning just as much as anyone who is listening to my voice today. Now, I have an incredible crew. I have a wife who is incredible. Her name is Monique. We have 3 kiddos. Our oldest is Noah, who's 10. Our middle is Micah, who's 6. And then we have a 10-month-old baby girl named Zoe. And yeah, that's right, we got our girl. That's right. And man, it's so incredible to spend time with my family. But just hearing what I listed right now probably alerts you to the fact that sleep is at a premium in our house right now. I mean, to get sleep in any substantial chunk of time is absolutely precious. And it's interesting because you would probably think it's always just the little baby girl that's waking us up. But anyone who's a parent knows that there are times where your kids will find their way into your room and interrupt the flow of sleep. It might be for any number of different reasons. But I think about how there have been times where one of my boys will come into the room when I'm sleeping, and it's gotten to the point where now they don't even need to say anything. I kind of just like feel their presence in the room, and I kind of like wake up. And when that happens, we have a little routine. Like I'll jump out of bed, I'll grab my son by the shoulder, kind of shepherd him back into the room. I'll settle him down in the bed, put a cover on him. And what's interesting about this little routine is nothing changes about the room that he's sleeping in. It's all the same stuff. Let's just say he was afraid of something under the bed or something jumping out of the closet. Well, that same space under the bed's still there. Closet's still there. But somehow my boy is able to get back to the place where he's able to rest and go to sleep. One thing changes. It's not the environment that changes. It's simply me being in the room. I'm kind of like a gateway, a door to anything bad coming in to this room. So it's interesting because I want us to focus on this phrase. Nothing about the environment changed, but my presence brought rest and assurance. Now, I'm just a regular dude who's just trying to be a good dad to his kids, but this is what's so interesting. When you think about the story of the Bible, this very thing was what people were wondering about Jesus. Is Jesus truly the one who will come and will bring comfort and rest? Is he really the one who will guard us against oppression, against the enemy's attacks? Is he really the one that will bring this comfort? Though nothing changes in our environment, will he bring the presence that produces rest, peace? This is what people were wondering in the time of the Bible. Now, we're going to jump into this story in John chapter 10 that talks about Jesus being the gate. But before we get to that story, I have to do a quick recap. All right? Have you ever watched a TV show or a movie and you come into it in the middle and you're like, who's that dude? And how did he get here? And what? I thought he lived over there. And what? Like, you ever been in that situation? You're completely confused. You don't know what's going on. So sometimes you need to get a little recap to catch you up to speed to help you fully appreciate the moment that you're taking in, whether it's a TV show, a movie. Well, here We're going to hear this story that is so important for us to know when we hear Jesus talk about being the gate. So in John chapter 9, right before we jump into where we're headed today, Jesus does a miracle. No surprise to anyone in here. As a matter of fact, Jesus is pretty much synonymous with miracles. I could ask you right now to shout out a miracle that Jesus has done, and everyone's probably going to have some answer. Well, in John chapter 9, Jesus heals a man who was blind from birth. Now, what's interesting about this particular miracle is that the scrutiny around whether or not Jesus has actually done this is heightened in a way that has not happened in any other part of the book of John till this point. Now, you might be thinking, well, what was such a big deal about Jesus healing this guy this time? Because as a matter of fact, we've seen in the Bible other times where Jesus has healed blind people. Why was it so important for the Pharisees and everyone watching to know whether or not he has actually healed a man who was blind from birth? Well, it's actually connected to something called the 4 messianic miracles. Now, this is referred to in the book of Isaiah, chapter 35, and you can also find it in the Talmud, which is basically this idea that if there were ever going to be one who would proclaim to be the Messiah, this Messiah could easily be filtered out from all of the people who are charlatans and are pulling a sham over people's eyes. Like, we could figure this out quickly if he has done one of these 4 things. The 4 messianic miracles are this. Number 1, that he would heal a leper. Leprosy is a skin condition that creates boils and sores that's incredibly painful. There was no human cure for leprosy at this time. As a matter of fact, if you had leprosy, you'd be put outside of the city. So the Messiah would be able to heal a leper. Number 2, the Messiah would be able to heal someone who was deaf and mute, who could not speak, who had no voice. The Messiah would be able to make someone speak who has never spoken. Number 3, and this is probably the one that's most familiar with most people, is the Messiah would have to deal in resurrection. In other words, after 3 days, if the Messiah was really the Messiah, he'd have to be able to raise someone from the dead. And number 4 is, you guessed it, a man that was blind from birth would need to be healed. Now you can see that when Jesus heals this blind man, a man blind from birth, everyone's attention is heightened because now they're saying, if this is true, that he's really done it, he might be the Messiah. So the scrutiny is high. The Pharisees are saying, no, this can't be. They interview the guy that he healed, and the guy's like, yeah, it was me. And then they send him away, and then they talk to the guy's parents. Was he really blind when he was a kid? And they were like, yeah. And then they send them away, and then they bring the dude back, and they're like, tell the story again. And then he's like, dude, I'm telling you, it's me. And so finally, Jesus gets word that this man has been sent away. He's being shamed by the Pharisees, and Jesus is talking to the guy and says, man, you know what? I've made you to be able to see, but some people are still blind. And the Pharisees hear this and they go, ho, 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 wait up. Are you saying that we're blind? And then Jesus begins to tell them a mashal. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world is a mashal? Well, it's a really big deal in the Hebrew Bible. The mashal is a proverb or a proverbial saying that will communicate an idea. So the story we're looking at in John 10, the proclamation Jesus makes that he is a gate, is in this mashal. And you need to know that it's in the temperature, in the cultural climate where they're all going, is this dude really from God? Is this dude who he says he is? Could he really be the Messiah? And this is what Jesus says to them. In John 10, starting in verse 1, very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. This is the mashal, the proverb that Jesus uses to describe who he really is to the Pharisees and in turn to us. And it's important for us to know about this story, who he was saying about himself then, because it matters for us to know who Jesus really is now. I want to go through this proverb, this mashal together, because it's really going to help us to see why this proclamation of Jesus being the gate is so important. Look at verse number 1 again with me. He says, very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. So what it says in our text today is sheep pen, but there's another word for this, which is a sheepfold. Everybody say sheepfold. A sheepfold is a very particular place where sheep congregate. Now, when I say sheep pen or sheepfold, we probably have an image in our mind of a big, wide open space, maybe a nice picket fence all the way around it. You got some fluffy sheep grazing out in the grass, and it's all gravy, right? Well, it's interesting. I took a trip to Israel a few years ago, and during this trip, I learned something really significant about the idea of a sheep pen or a sheepfold. I want to show you this photo that I took when I was there in Israel. For some of us, it looks like a very undramatic bunch of rocks and dirt and patches of grass, but this is a sheepfold. A sheepfold is different than what we think of here in the States when it comes to where sheep are contained. As a matter of fact, this isn't the permanent holding place for sheep. A sheepfold or a sheep pen that is being referred to here in this text was utilized by the shepherd when he was leading the sheep along the path, and maybe it's getting toward the end of the day and he's not going to be able to make it back to their home. So the shepherd would start looking for a sheepfold. And the shepherd would usher the sheep directly into this little cave. They would make their way, and they would kind of just bunch in the back, and the sheep would kind of be laying all on top of each other. They love to snuggle and get real tight, right? The sheep would hang out in this sheepfold, and the primary reason for this place was that it was a holding place of safety. Sheepfold was a place that the shepherd could utilize in order to keep his sheep safe. So it's then very vital for us to see that his reference to thieves and robbers is very relevant. What he's saying is, you're moving the sheep along, you get to the sheepfold, you got this holding place where you're not at home, you need to have some protection. And then he talks about how only the shepherd could go in and out for the sheep to be safe. Because if not, a thief and a robber trying to make their way into this sheepfold would be alarming. So sometimes the thieves and the robbers trying to make their way into the sheepfold would cause a disruption, but the sheep would know, that's not my shepherd. They would know that's not the one who keeps us safe. It's interesting because I think about thieves and robbers, and how Jesus was even talking about guarding against that then. But I think about that even today in our own lives. Like, there are times where someone would presume to be a shepherd, but the reality is they might act like that. They might act like a thief or like a shepherd, but they might actually be a thief and a robber. They might not really have good intentions. They might try to seem like the shepherd, but really they're dangerous. You know what's interesting is for some it might feel like a reach, but for others it might hit too close to home. Some of us have had church hurt. Some of us have experienced this thing. We thought someone might be safe for us. We thought they put themselves forward as the shepherd, but really they were not safe at all. And some of us are actually healing from this. Let's keep reading. In verse 2, it says, "The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice." Get this. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. This phrase, by name, would not have been missed by the listeners of the mashal. This phrase, by name, in the Bible is a really big deal. I think some of us know this probably intrinsically if you've read the Bible at all. This whole idea of God having a name, especially in the Old Testament, was wild. You remember there's this proclamation by God before Abraham was, "I am." So the name of God was too big for human people to even utter. And yet, the God who is bigger than our human words could contain would know our name, each one of us. Not only does he know our name, he gives us a new name. How many people need to be reminded today that our story, that our sin, that our mistakes don't define us in Jesus? In Jesus, we get a new name. Shame from sin no longer holds us captive. Who we were in the past, we can have a new name. And it says that the shepherd knows the name of his sheep. Verse 4, when he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. The thing I want to point out about this little chunk of the mashal is the language that Jesus uses to describe the shepherd. He says, the sheep are his own. This might be a passing phrase when we read it, but when we actually see the original language here, it's talking about a level or degree of intimacy that breeds a sense of true connection, true knownness. And it says that the shepherd calls out his own. They are his. He is theirs. They are intimately interwoven. When there's that kind of intimacy between the shepherd and the sheep, there will be no confusion and or distraction when it comes to communication between them. So I told you I took this trip to Israel. And one of the things I was looking forward to the most was seeing shepherds with sheep. Because I don't know if you know this, but they're still rolling around out there in the Middle East. They got some sheep behind them, and they're leading their sheep in different directions. Now, I will tell you this. The shepherds today, it was a little bit of a letdown because I was hoping for the shawl and a staff. But the shepherds today rock Nikes and stuff, right? Like skinny jeans. I'm like, this is weird, man. This is not what I thought we were going to witness. But the shepherd is still leading his sheep. The other interesting dynamic about shepherds today is they're not just in this wide open pasture in the middle of this land of flourishing. No, there's streets and highways and signs and stoplights that are all around the shepherds with sheep. It's kind of a weird, disconcerting reality, seeing a shepherd with a flock of sheep right behind him, following his every word in the midst of all this noise and distraction. But what's wild is you could have honking horns and trucks whizzing by, but the shepherd just needs a little whistle, or maybe just a little sound, or just a little word. And the sheep are so intimately connected with the shepherd that nothing will distract them from connection with him. This is who Jesus, in the mashal, was telling them who he was. And that's who he is today. Now, I want to point out the very next verse because it's really important for us to pay attention to. They hear this mashal. Jesus gives them this proverb. And look at what it says in verse 6. Jesus used this figure of speech, the mashal, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Now, this is interesting because it's obvious that the Pharisees would have understood about sheep. You know why? Because they're everywhere. There are shepherds and sheep everywhere. There's no question about the actual logistical elements of what Jesus is saying in his proverb. So the question here wasn't, did they understand what he was talking about? They knew what he was talking about, but what it's really saying here is they didn't understand what he was saying about himself. See, they understood sheep, shepherds, sheepfold, thieves, robbers. We get it. But what they didn't understand, that this was the proclamation. This was the reminder that while they're scrambling around, trying to figure out who he really is, he's telling them, I am the one. I am the shepherd. So they don't get it. So I love that Jesus kind of flips the script right here. They don't understand that he's the shepherd, so he says, all right, well, let me talk about this same thing in a different way. Look at verse 7. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. So Jesus takes a completely different tact with these guys. They don't understand what he's saying, and so he says, I will be utterly clear. I want to throw this photo I took back up one more time. One thing that I failed to mention here is the sheep would get ushered into this cave, and the rocks that are built on the side would kind of be a wall that would keep out any sort of enemy, the thieves and the robbers. But there's one really important component. The sheep would get settled in the back of the cave. They would begin to fall asleep. The shepherd would survey the land, and you know what he would do? Right here, in this space, the shepherd would lay down right in front of the sheep. The shepherd would lay across this opening. It's the only way in and it's the only way out. What that means is any thief or robber would need to go through the shepherd to get to the sheep. So what it says then in this text is that the shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. So when Jesus is telling this mashal, when he is telling this proverb, he is saying, be very clear. I came to lay down my life for my sheep. Anyone else who came before me is a thief and a robber. I am the gate. I'm the doorway. Jesus is saying, I am the door in and I am the door out. Some of you are thinking about a chapter of scripture a few pages over in 14:6 of John that says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the... No one comes to the Father except through me. This is Jesus. Jesus says, I am the gate. Now, some of us might hear that and go, well, a gate? It's kind of interesting because some of us who are free spirits in the room, some of us who are free thinkers in the room, you're like, man, a gate feels restrictive, right? The gate will keep you in. You're bound. But these sheep felt utterly safe because they knew that their shepherd was keeping them, holding them. Anything that would come against them would have to go through the shepherd. The gate, one way in and one way out, is through the shepherd. Now, Jesus was saying this about himself, and then he kind of puts an exclamation point on this little story in verse 10 to make clear that they understand who he truly is. It says that the thief comes only to steal, and kill, and destroy. I come that they may have life and have a life to the full. Now, one of the things that's interesting in this verse is something called triadic thinking. Triadic thinking in the Bible is really important to pay attention to because when you enact triadic thinking, it reinforces your point. Like when you say something 3 times in a row, it kind of brings like a richness behind it. Like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Or there's another time where Jesus says, ask and seek and knock, right? Well, here he's talking about the enemy. He says, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. You know what he's trying to do with that triadic thinking? He's saying, yeah, the enemy's strong. The enemy will come with force. The enemy is tricky. How many people know that sin is sneaky sometimes? How many people know that temptation can come before you even realizes it makes its appearance? He says, yeah. The enemy's got some force behind it, but I thwart even the force of the thieves and the robber. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I give life. You know, this idea of giving life is absolutely the picture of salvation. Jesus lays down his life as the gate for the sheep, and the sheep can know life because of him. And here's what's so beautiful about this abundant life. The abundant life truly is the opposite of a life of fear, a life of wondering whether or not we're gonna make it. Some of us are wondering right now, is this situation I'm going through gonna take me down? Is there more in this life that will overwhelm me, that will never let me flourish? And Jesus is saying, come to me. I am the gate. I am the one who will give you what you need. A man named G.K. Chesterton once said, the more I considered Christianity, the more I found that while it had established a rule and order, the chief aim of that order was to give room for good things to run wild. The abundant life is us knowing the safety and the security of the gate, that Jesus truly is the gate. He is the one who tempers the attacks of the enemy. If we trust our life in the gate, he will be the one who brings us to salvation. I told you that story in the beginning about my kiddos and how my presence in the room was what brought comfort and rest for my people. Jesus was telling them then, and he's telling us today, if you need comfort and rest and assurance, if you feel like the things in this world are more than you can bear, if your sin and your shame are holding you captive and you feel like there is no hope for a new story, a new future, come to me. I am the gate. I am the way in and the way out of an abundant life, that you would be able to run wild and free knowing me.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us on our YouTube channel today. I hope that you felt the welcome home of Christ right through your screen. Here we believe that the gospel is good news worth sharing. So if you'd like to share this stream with your friends and family, you can also subscribe to this channel, and you can use @BridgeChurchTN. Also, if you'd like to give, there's a link in the description there you can click, and it'll walk you through all the steps. And if you'd like to stay connected with us, you can simply head on over to bridge.tv. Hope to see you again soon.